With Scarlet and Violet, the latest game in the Pokemon franchise, having been released at the end of last year, and still getting updates and supposed DLC, the game is alive and kicking. And the Pokemon fanbase is more than willing to take guesses and stabs at potential things going on behind the scenes. With how massive this franchise is, and with Scarlet and Violet being the first real open-world mainline Pokemon game, there have been a lot of theories circulating on the internet. I'm Kyle with PokeBinge, and these are Pokemon Scarlet and Violet fan theories we love and hate. Let's just jump into our first theory on our list, which is that Heath, or someone on his squad, is from the current time, which is a theory that was put forward by Reddit user Oleander Vine. Heath is a secondary character who is only known through a book they left behind. This book documents most of the weird phenomenon we see in the game, such as the Paradox Donphan. Now, this is mostly to show the effects of terrestrializing, as well as the time machine. Heath mentions that he suffered from a lapse in memory, which could be from him getting sent back in time. At least, that's what this theory suggests. Which is interesting because it would explain some of the mystery we're still dealing with. That said, all things considered, we don't really like this idea, because although it does bring up some interesting points, it feels like it's explaining something that didn't need an explanation. A shorter theory on our list comes courtesy of Pikmin Attacker on Reddit, which is Battlebond Greninja is a past Paradox form. This is obviously referring to the Pokemon Greninja, a final evolution to a starter that quickly became a fan favorite. During the events of the X and Y anime, Ash formed a special bond with his Greninja, causing it to transform into Ash Greninja. This led to the Battlebond ability to land in the games themselves, and allowing your Greninja to transform during battle, like it was a Dragon Ball Z fight. Now, this theory speculates that this special transformation is actually Greninja tapping into its past form, becoming a Paradox Pokemon. Though considering it doesn't actively appear in Generation 9, it's hard to see how this would be the case. And what they could mean is that because the form is no longer available, it is from the past and may be introduced in a future update or DLC as a past Paradox Pokemon. We'll say that we have mixed feelings on this theory because while introducing it as a Paradox form would be cool, we don't think it's all too likely. Our next theory is that both Sada and Turo are Arven's parents. This, we'll say, is an interesting theory that suggests that despite the fact that Scarlet and Violet have different stories and professors, they're more connected than we believed. This specifically relates to the professors, both Professor Sada from Scarlet and Professor Turo from Violet. In the games, Arven is the son of the respective professor, and it seems like they're a single parent who left him alone most of the time. This theory suggests that both games had a version of Sada and Turo, and this leads to Arven looking like both. Though one could argue Arven's design invokes Sada more than Turo. Some things, like his eyebrows and some of the darker parts of his hair, are based on Turo. So with the fact he canonically comes from at least one of them, it makes sense that he may come from both at the same time. We may never know for sure, but we will say that we love this idea, and it makes perfect sense for the series. Next up, we have the imaginary Pokemon theory, which has been circulating a bit on Reddit. The general idea is that the disc-like being, otherwise known as the terrestrial source, is willing imaginary creatures into existence. This means that the Paradox Pokemon that you face off against in Scarlet and Violet are not and were not real Pokemon, but are instead figments of the region's imagination willed to life. Though the only real piece of evidence provided as of right now is the fact that Arven supposedly mentions that Paradox Pokemon were documented before the creation of the time machine, which is compelling but in no way proves the theory specifically. The only other piece of evidence this theory has is in the Chimera Pokemon we'll be discussing momentarily, but seeing as how they aren't currently in the game, we can't really bring that up. With that said, we'll say that we have mixed feelings about this theory. The next theory we'll be discussing is the Chimera Pokemon for the DLC. This so-called Chimera Pokemon has been found illustrated and has some information in the files. These Chimeras seem to be a mix of the legendary dogs from Generation 2, Suicune, Entei, and Raikou, and the other one looks similar to the Swords of Justice from Gen 5, Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion. Considering these things seem to be fusions of these trios, it's likely they're another form of Paradox Pokemon from the base game, and of course will likely be game exclusive. The theory details that they'll be a major part of the eventual DLC released in the games, considering the assumed third major legendary being the source of terrestrialization, and the aforementioned imagination theory. It's assumed that these Chimera are actually imaginary and what people think a Pokemon from Area Zero would look like. Now, there are a lot of potential ways this Chimera could pop up in the DLC, and if it's done well, we're excited to see what they do. So we'll say that we really like this idea. Jumping back to Reddit theories, we have a Paradox form resembling both Glalie and Frostlass, from Reddit user Aplace. Now, they don't bring up exactly why they think these Pokemon specifically would get a special Paradox form, but they mention the logic behind the choice. In Pokemon Violet, one of the Paradox Pokemon that you can catch is named Iron Valiant, and is a futuristic version of Gallade. Although Iron Valiant does take more design cues from Mega Gallade, it is intriguing to note the influences of Gardevoir in there as well, which led this user to speculate about the potential combination. Considering how different these two Pokemon are, it would be very interesting to see how these two would combine. Secondly, it would make sense for either the past or the future to streamline an evolution like this. Considering how good these two Pokemon are, seeing this Paradox form would be really cool. So we have to say, despite the fact that there isn't really any evidence, we would love to see this one come to fruition. In another vein, the same Reddit user theorizes that we may see a Paradox Lantern in Dedenne. Now, they give some pretty good reasons why we may see these two particular Pokemon getting Paradox forms. The reason for Dedenne is that the Pokemon's Pokedex entry in Pokemon Scarlet mentions that it's not fully developed its electric cheek pouches. They say that this implies Dedenne may get an evolved Paradox form to show a fully mastered version of his electric abilities. While this makes sense, it doesn't really fit the vibe of the other future Paradox forms we see. What might is the Paradox Lantern they mention. Specifically, it comes from a trading card called Yokohama's Pikachu, where a lantern submarine is seen. And they mention that this would make sense because Iron Thorns, the future Paradox Pokemon version of Tyranitar, is based on a robot from Pokemon Black and White. It's definitely a creative idea, and for that reason, we have to say that we would love to see this theory happen. The final Reddit theory we'll be discussing is that the DLC will focus on Southern Kalos alone. This theory breaks down a potential storyline for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's potential DLC. This comes from a mix of potential hints and story beats that hint to Kalos being a major potential part of any future content. It's well known by this point that Paldea is based on Spain, which is remarkably close to France, which the Kalos region is based on. Now, this has been brought up plenty of times by this point, but on the northeastern part of the Paldean map is a massive wall that can't be climbed or passed, and based on where it is, it may be connected to Kalos. We saw in the Sword and Shield DLC, they aren't adverse to making new hubs and other such things with large maps to base the stories or the DLC on. Now, they mention it would be a portion of Kalos to the south that we either didn't explore or didn't see much of in X and Y. We'll say we have mixed feelings on this one. With how much could be done, hypothetically, if Kalos came back into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it would seem like a waste to just do a section of the region, and not the whole thing. Next, something that doesn't have to deal with the map of the DLC, but rather the story. The theory that the DLC will conclude Kalos' mysteries. When it comes to the many Pokemon games out there, a lot of the unsolved mysteries have popped up, and the 6th generation's X and Y are no different. In fact, there are a few major plot points and mysteries that were never solved, because the rumored Pokemon Z never came out. And this includes, but is not limited to, the mysterious ghost Hexmaniac you meet randomly, as in his Floette, and more of the story regarding Zygarde. Considering Paldea's proximity to Kalos, and the fact that these mysteries remain unsolved all these years later, it would kind of make sense to have these characters and mysteries finally explained. In fact, with the similarities between Zygarde and the supposed terrestrial source, it could even make sense to have the two connected in the DLC. So we have to say that we absolutely love this theory, and would really enjoy having these mysteries finally solved. The final theory we'll be discussing today is a quick one, but it's that the DLC will bring Mega Evolutions back. Granted, this continues in theorizing that Kalos will be playing a major role in the DLC. However, plenty of things point to this being something that is very possible. First of all, we have the aforementioned Iron Valiant and Roaring Moon, who are very clearly based on Mega Gallade and Mega Salamence respectively. Then we have the fact that Terra Crystals and Terrestrializing have interesting effects and are based on crystals similar to the Mega Stones. However, the most damning evidence is that prominent leaker Riddler Q on Twitter made a post hinting that Mega Evolutions will be part of the DLC in some way. And yes, we would absolutely love for this to be the case, as beyond regional variants, it's one of the most interesting things added to the Pokemon mainline games in a long time. But let us know in the comments section which of these Scarlet and Violet theories you like the most, and which ones you think could be true. Make sure to hit that notification bell and binge our other Pokemon videos. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.